And I can make you wanna stay. And I can make you wanna stay.
Und wir sind live.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for watching. Since this is called Creativity Rules, I just heard Rory's bit, and obviously that was all about the creativity and the connection to the other parts of that. I need to concentrate a little bit on the rules part, actually, because, as you probably know, film is a business, and creativity on the scale of movies, which are easily exceeding $200 million these days, doesn't really exist in a vacuum. Someone pays for it. Unfortunately, I have to say, or it would be a lot easier if it didn't have to be that way. So someone needs to translate the creative ideas in a screenplay, probably in the director's head or in the DP's and production designer's head, into money, into budget. And that's where the visual effects producer comes in. Now, I want to argue that that in itself is actually a creative job, and it does need a lot of imagination. I'll tell you why in a second. What I love about this job is that the visual effects producer is one of a very, very few people who are there from pretty much the very beginning of pre-production to the very end of a project. Even a line producer is usually only there for the prep and the shoot, and then is not there during post anymore. The disadvantage, of course, is that you can only make a movie every 2 years or so, and you know, other groups can make a lot more movies, of course. What's also exciting about it, I think, is that that job touches all the aspects of a movie, all the groups. You touch special effects, second unit, first unit, obviously, camera, production design, even costumes, and a lot of times even film soundtrack. And pretty much the entire time you are very close to the director. So let me get started first with just a little overview about myself. So I've done this for close to 30 years now. I've mostly been a visual effects supervisor. I've on a lot of different movies, and all kinds of different genres, sci-fi, historical drama, action, comedy, not only feature films, but also TV, commercials, and write films. And I noticed that pretty much all of these different types of films are working in the same way. It doesn't really matter if you work on a commercial that has maybe $100,000 visual effects budget, or a feature film like 2012 they did a little over 10 years ago that had $75 million just visual effects budget and over $200 million overall budget. So when I started out in 1999, actually, and opened up a production company with my business partner and friend, Volker Engel, through that company and other things on the side, I had several different roles, not just visual effects supervisor and visual effects producer, but also producer, executive producer, co-producer, second unit director, and so on. Mostly, though, I've been on the side of the filmmakers. I've worked for Sony, Disney, Fox, and Universal, all the major studios, most of the major studios. But also worked a few times on the vendor side, meaning the visual effects companies that are providing the footage, the actual visual effects shots. Uncharted Territory actually had a very unique setup. Since visual effects is a volatile business and we wanted to be completely immersed in one movie at a time, we decided to actually, and here's my phone. Let me just turn that off. Sorry. That was my mom. Since it's a volatile business, you know, we decided to do a setup of an in-house visual effects department for only the current movie, only one movie that we're in. We'll set it up for that movie very specifically, get all the people together that we need for that specific task, and then basically dissolve it afterwards again, so it's just Volker and myself. This was sometimes, could have been a small team on smaller TV movies, for instance, of only 15 to 20 people, or as large as this one here, which was for the movie 2012, where we had over 60 artists alone and did 2 major sequences. On the talk here, even though I've mostly been visual effects supervisor, I wanted to concentrate on visual effects producer. Mainly because the visual effects producer is a bit neglected, I think, in terms of learning opportunities. It's usually learning by doing. And I know there's a lot of need for visual effects producers because there are overall visual effects producers like I was on the studio side. And also every visual effects house has usually several visual effects in-house producers who are doing their bidding and working on the multiple projects that a visual effects house would be doing. So since an overall visual effects producer is responsible, and he's solely responsible actually for the entire visual effects budget, as I mentioned, which could easily approach $100 million these days. That's why we're also usually lucky to get co-producer credits on films. I actually think it's deserved. Because of that, I think it's a bit of an oversight to not specifically really teach that aspect. So I'm trying to fill that little bit of a gap here really quickly in half an hour. I will go through as much detail as I think I can do, but obviously I could talk about this for a week. So if there are any questions, I hope I can answer at least a few of them afterwards. So I wish really there also, besides the learning opportunities, I wish that there was a clear path to that job, but like in everything in visual effects, also with the visual effects supervisor, so there is no clear, regulated, if you might say so, path that says, okay, well, first you're this, and then you learn to do this, and then you study that, and then you become a visual effects producer. That is simply not the case. Which, on the other hand, also opens up a lot of opportunities. The thing is that I talked earlier that there's 2 different types. There's the visual effects producer on the production side, which I'll mostly concentrate on here because that was mostly what I've been doing, but also a visual effects producer on the vendor visual effects house side. Now, what's interesting about it, even though they have the same title, is that in essence, if you really think about it, they do have completely opposite goals, but usually I try to still have a cordial relationship because the goal of the visual effects producer on the production side is to make sure that there is, well, first, that the production is organized and managed really well, that the vision of the director ends up on the screen, and that we do not go over budget. Now, the visual effects producer on the vendor side needs to do the same thing on the vendor side, which is sometimes contrary to the overall visual effects producer, because the vendor, obviously, the visual effects house needs to make money in order to exist. The more money they make, the better it is. Now, the visual effects producer on the studio side has to make sure that that kind of gets kept within a reasonable realm. I, always like to be very fair. I'm not one of those people who want to just kind of squeeze the last bit out of vendor, because I know that that doesn't make a lot of sense, because I want these visual effects houses to be there for my next project and the next project after that too. Especially if you find people and visual effects houses that you've been working with that you like on the personal level and also obviously on the creative level, then you want to make sure that they survive. So first you try to give them as much work as you possibly can if you have anything to give, and you try to make sure that the pricing for that is fair. Let me just move on to another slide here. So the very first thing is, if you look at the teams, I usually like to keep the team as small as possible, which really completely depends on the project, of course. But this is the setup of a regular visual effects production side team. So you have the visual effects producer as the managerial head of the department, and the visual effects supervisor as the creative head of the department. Below that, directly reporting to the visual effects producer, is the visual effects production manager. So it's very similar to a live action setup. You also have, on that same level, a digital asset manager. Now, the digital asset manager is actually responsible for all the movement of data, and I'll get to that later, of what the kind of data is that we're collecting on set from the vendors and so on. And it's actually quite a big task. Again, I'll go into that a little bit later. You have a visual effects coordinator. The visual effects coordinator, a lot of times it could be multiple people. Usually these days you shoot in several different locations. So even if you just shoot in one location, it's usually not the same location that you're doing the post in. That has something to do with the tax incentives that I will also come to a little later. So you may have a coordinator that will stay with you until the end of the shoot, and then it'll be taken over by a post-production coordinator. You have a data wrangler, sometimes multiples. I'll actually get into that as well in a second. And you have witness camera operators. I will also show a few items. Actually, let me see if I can do this right now. So here, for instance, is a witness camera operator. That's from last film I was working on, the Nutcracker and the Four Realms. Now, witness cameras are really, really important because here's an end camera setup, for instance, because of this. Your camera can be on a crane these days, on a car. This is from movie 2012. This as well, on a so-called Russian arm. It can be in a helicopter. This is a multitude of problems here. Actually, you have multiple cameras and we have a moving platform. So this is also from the movie 2012. And so now, in order to later be able to track, you see all the beautiful tracking marks on the screen. You have to really make sure that you know where your camera was, but also where your actual object, in this case, the camper van there was. This is a set build from White House down, a partial White House set actually. And so you'll just see, just based on the size of the set, a lot of times, sets like this are being shot, especially in action sequences with, we could use up to 6 or 7 cameras actually. And you need to know for each one of these cameras, here's another one, cranes from 2012. You need to know for every one of these cameras where it was located, at what point in time, in order, and what kind of lens data it has for each of the takes that you have, in order to later be able to post-produce this and track this correctly afterwards. The visual effects production side team, or actually, sorry. Now the phases that we're talking about these days are pretty much still the same as they were about 100 years ago, but they start to overlap more and more due to new technology. We still separate out our phases in pre-production, shoot, and post-production, even though post-production really starts during pre-production and goes on all the way through the shoots and so on. I will explain a little bit of that later. The time frames for a big feature film is usually that you have about hopefully 4 months of pre-production, 4 to 5 months of shoot, and 7 to 9 months. This can be longer, shorter, depending on what film you're working on, of course. 7 to 9 months of post-production. Now, the new technology, you all might have seen Disney's Mandalorian TV series, which famously has been using virtual studio setups with large-scale LED screens that are controlled, that have controlled backgrounds that are controlled by the Unreal Engine. So you have live changing backgrounds with changing perspective. That kind of stuff, of course, needs a lot more prep time. You'd be very hard pressed to do this in 4 months because you have to essentially create photoreal backgrounds that normally would be created in post for the shoot. So in that case, the whole paradigm of prep, shoot, and post changed actually. Now, when we get into, let's call it normal prep, one of the very first things I like to do is to create a project wiki. So basically Wikipedia, like an online one, but a private Wikipedia that has and collects over time all the information that anybody needs. I always think that everybody on the show, including myself, needs to be replaceable, because I could be run over by a bus tomorrow, and I, don't want this to delay anything. That's how I roll. So that wiki basically will contain all kinds of information, and it starts obviously with a screenplay. Let's get to that quickly. Now, the very, very first thing that we do in pre-production is a breakdown. Sometimes studios already commission a breakdown and the first rough bids before any pre-production even starts. They need to do that in order to get a good idea about what kind of a movie they have there. Do we have an $80 million, $150 million, or $200 million movie? So for that, somebody, and that is usually a visual effects producer, goes ahead and does a breakdown. Now, a breakdown just based on the script is actually quite a tough job, and it's also, that is the one that needs a lot of imagination. Because, well, how do you know if you read a segment like this here? Just look at the middle there. Thousands of aliens ring the lip of the crater. The Black Order leads a platoon of blah, 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 and so on. How many visual effect shots is this? How much is it supposed to cost? Well, one thing that really helps with this is that script pages have always been written to be approximately 1 page a minute. And that has been a rule pretty much forever, I think since the 20s, and still the case. And it's actually working pretty well. So if you do have a 120-page script, it's probably going to come in somewhere around 120 minutes. That's the way it's written. So, and that gives you one advantage, because obviously, as a visual effects producer, you don't even know who the director is going to be a lot of times in this case. So how do you break this down? How do you come up with an idea of how many shots this might be? So what you can do, and that's what I've always done in the beginning, is when you assume this is 1 minute here, this one page, then you can assume that the shot length is a certain length based on the type of scene it is. So if you have an action scene, for instance, a lot going on, your shot length of every average shot might be like 1 to 2 seconds or something like that. If it's a dialogue sequence, then you're probably more like 5 to 7 seconds or so. So in essence, what I'll do is I'll start and look at the script and just look at, okay, well, how long, let's say half of this page is an action sequence. Well, that means, I can say if the whole page is about 60 seconds long, and I have a shot every second, then that is probably 30 shots. So I can put 30 shots into my breakdown. And that basically, if you do that, gives you the first rough breakdown. Let me see, I'm not sure if I have a slide of that here. No, I'll go to budget first. So the breakdown is usually split into 2 different categories. One is the actual shots, and the second category is assets. That's extremely important because shots and assets are being worked on in a completely different scale. So an asset is anything that gets reused over multiple shots. So this could be a digital Marvel character, for instance. It could be something like the digital model version of the White House that gets used in a lot of shots. So you have to first create a very, very good model of the White House and make sure it's really usable from all the different angles. And that itself is a budget item, because that'll cost you probably several $100,000 just to build this really detailed model at first. But once you build it, you can now use it in, I don't know, probably 100 different shots. So that cost will be amortized over so and so many shots. That's why I really like to be very careful in the beginning about splitting up shots and assets in a very, very meaningful way. Now, when the very, very first budget gets created by the studio, it kind of looks like this. This is just a sample screenshot from the software Movie Magic Budgeting. That software, I think, is from the 1700s, but it still is being used by pretty much all the studios for the overall production. It's not really made for visual effects budgeting itself, so I don't like to use it for the actual visual effects part, but the overall part still needs to usually go into this. Let's go back. The budget categories actually that you start with are these. So the first category that goes into this overall budget is the visual effects production team. As I mentioned before, that's the visual effects supervisor, producer, coordinator, PAs, and so on and so on. The short asset cost, usually in this budget, if let's say you only have one single, like a large house, like DNEG, MPC, anybody like that, Frame Store, that does the big portion of your movie, what you usually do is you just put one number in here and say, okay, they'll get $80 million to do all this. The details are just with you at the moment. The other part is film scanning and data transfer. So we're still, for some reason, are still shooting with 35mm film. It's because I think DPs have rediscovered it and just like the look of it, which does make our life in visual effects a little bit more difficult, sometimes actually quite hell if they also shoot 65mm, which was kind of last used in Lawrence of Arabia. But the cost of that film scanning or the cost of digital data transfer, if you shoot with, say, a red camera or whatever, is in this part. Cost of review. Obviously, you have to either have your own screening room. I like actually doing that. I like building our own screening room. It's worth it. It might cost you $25,000 to build a screening room, but if you have a $70 million budget, it's actually really a drop in the bucket. And if you think about what it costs to rent a screening room every time to go to one, it's really worthwhile getting your own one with a decent projector. It doesn't have to be, a cinema projector necessarily. The other part is airfares, hotels, per diem, car hire, anything that has to do with locations and whatever, plus equipment rental, craft service, and so on, that goes into one section. If your film has a 3D stereo conversion, all that, the entire team, which stereo will have its own stereo supervisor, coordinator, stereo editor, the actual conversion cost and so on goes into that. And then the very end, you have the tax credit deductions. And the tax credits are something peculiar that started, well, probably about 20 years ago, I think. Here's just an example of a map of just US state tax credits. As you can see, they're all different. There are tax credits in most parts of the world. France, Germany, England, South Africa, a lot of other parts have tax credits. And the good news is that you as a visual effects producer don't really have to deal with the actual tax credits, with setting them up, because that's what the studio does. But when they're in place, because either you shoot in one of those locations, or you do your post-production in one of those locations, or the visual effects house is in one of those locations, then the studio usually does those contracts, but you are the one who's responsible on calculating correctly how this turns out, because your original budget will be based usually on two numbers. You have the budget that is the actual cash budget, which has all the tax credits already taken off, and that's real money that you have to deal with. And then you have one that's probably 30-40 million higher, that is the overall budget. Now, the real money that they spend, that's the important one, because you want to make sure that you're constantly tracking the savings that you have by being in a certain location. And sometimes this can be pretty complicated, because the rules specify that only certain things are actually valid to apply for tax credits. Airfares might or might not. So you may not be able to actually put those in there. So you have to have a knowledge of that, or work, hopefully, if you have one, very, very closely to your production side visual effects accountants or the overall accountants. Now, the nice thing about tax credits is not only that they give you money back or give you free money, so to speak, but also the tax credits are really the reasons why I have in the past shot and LiDAR scanned and whatever in Canada, Mexico, Alaska, Norway, France, England, South Africa, and last but not least, Germany. I think if those tax credits hadn't been in place, that would have never happened. So the positive thing about it is that we all get to travel a lot. The negative thing about it is that we all have to travel a lot. So the problem is, of course, that you sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, need two different teams. You need one team that is at your shoot in, say, Canada. And then once you go into post-production, you kind of have to start over with another team, because otherwise it'll cost you a lot, because you want to try to find your teams locally. If they're not local, you have to pay for the airfares, you pay for per diems, you pay for hotels, and so on. So, a lot of times, if we have to make a decision, since post-production is so much longer, then I usually try to find somebody who's local in the post-production area, let's say California, and bring that person over to the shoot, since the shoot is usually half or even less than half the time of the actual post-production. Let's see, what I like to use for visual effects, since I mentioned that I don't like to use movie magic, is shotgun. There is, just briefly, this is one view of shotgun. So shotgun in essence is really a internet-based database system that actually is made for visual effects and animation. It can be used in-house. Some visual effects companies use it in-house as their visual effects tracking tool in-house. You can use it, like I did, overall for the production. It's, funnily enough, not really made for budgeting, but it has one important feature, and that's it can do calculations, just simple sums. And based on that, you can kind of hack your way around it and make it work very well for tracking the budget, as well as the breakdown of shots and assets. A competitor to that, I just want to show it fast, is F-Track. For instance, also, I think a very capable tool. I personally haven't used it. I've explored it only, and I think it's very good, but obviously at some point in time, you just have to make a decision. So you go with something, and I've used shotgun for quite a while. I would not recommend Excel. A lot of people actually do that or ask me that, because Excel is, well, here's the thing, is I got to specify that, because I do use Excel as well, kind of to import into shotgun, for instance, or to do, little calculation sheets on the side. But if you want to have a centralized system that is accessible to everybody who needs to access it, and you want to have all your data locally in one system. I've tried it before with, having FileMaker for this and Excel for that and this for that. And so it's just always a nightmare, because you have to update all these different pieces. Also, Excel is not a database, so it is very, very easy to make mistakes in Excel. And I've made them myself, and I've found a lot of them too from vendors and other people, that it's easy to delete a line. Now, if you can imagine, if you deal with shots that are costing up to $120,000, $150,000, if you delete a line, that is significant, and that really throws everything off. And sometimes you might not notice that for weeks. So it's a lot more robust to actually have a database system where formulas and are actually hard coded into it. You are doing that, rather than being able to delete certain fields and whatever, like you can in Excel. So now, when you get a little bit further in the pre-production process, now you start, working with the director, with the DP, and so on, and you get a little bit better idea of what the shots are going to be. Now you can start making a little bit more detailed breakdown than the one that was made originally just based on the script. This is what it looks like. This might be a little bit small here. I can just zoom in a little bit into this. This is from the Nutcracker and the Four Realms. As an example. So one of the things that's important, should go in the wiki, are the naming conventions of your shots. There's no real standard. A lot of people do it in different ways. I like to break it down into sequences. LON is a London sequence, for instance. Then the actual scene number to refer directly back to the script. I think it's very, very helpful to always know where you are in the script, because the script, the screenplay, gets constantly updated by the studio and is the Bible for everything and everyone. So if you know these shots are here like this in scene 2, scene 3, and so on, it is very helpful. This is something that doesn't need to be done, but I also found it very helpful while I'm still in pre-production and while these shots are still basically imaginary and not actual shots that we have shot and edited and then given to the vendors to work on. I mark them with a little P in front, just so I can see this is the pre-production shot. And later I'll slowly replace them, so I can also always have a good idea. Okay, well, here's what was planned. I had 50 shots here, 5 shots here, and now I got 10. Well, how did that happen? So that's all pretty helpful. This is the second part. This is an asset, the asset breakdown here. For assets, I like to do a similar thing like with the visual effects shot sequences. I give assets a 3-letter designation of what type of asset they are. So these are all BLDs. BLD means building. I have, a lot of other types. I might have PLT for planned. I might have CHA for character, things like that. So I usually have, I don't know what, maybe 8 to 10 or so different asset types. So I always immediately know, okay, this is what this is. ENV for an environment, and so on. And then I designate these assets. If you can see it here, let me just, oops, sorry. Let's go back. Let me just zoom in a little bit again. So for the assets, you need to specify usually what the level of detail is. So level of detail A, B, C, D. Again, that's quite arbitrary how you designate that, but you do have to designate it at the beginning of the show. So level of detail A will be something, for instance, that appears fully on screen, while a level of detail C or D might be something that's all the way in the background. That is significant, of course, for the vendor who builds these to know, because they need to know, well, how high res do my textures have to be? How, I don't know, how good does my animation have to be? How do I need a muscle system for this character, or is it really this small in the background so it doesn't matter at all? That's that. I also like to designate in, like here on the right, you see in which sequences these characters appear. So basically cross-reference it. That makes it a little easier for the vendor to find actually what these things are meant to be. And the more information you can put in there, the better it is. Let me get out of this again. As you are working on these breakdowns, you also want to continue and make sure that you have a clear idea about what you want your vendors, and give them a clear idea of what you want them to deliver. So for that, you have the so-called delivery specs. I could just zoom in a little bit down here so you can see it. So this is from Independence Day Resurgence, for instance, which was actually shot in 6K, which is a huge amount of data, of course. So you need to let the vendors know exactly what they'll be getting. So if it's shot with one camera, you will be getting 6,144 by so-and-so resolution. If it's shot with this camera, it's going to be different. What is your end format? Do you want them to deliver also in 6K? Usually not. I mean, Netflix wants 4K deliveries. A lot of feature films we still actually do in 2K. A lot of times also cost So this is something that you want to do as early as possible. And for that, again, you have to work very closely with the camera department, with the DP. What kind of camera does he want to use? Also make sure that you know what kind of lenses, for instance, he uses, and what kind of medium it will be extracted from. Are they, or two, will they be getting DPX files? Will they be 16-bit, 32-bit? Will they be linear, or there's so many different options, and all that is really your job to make sure, together with the visual effects supervisor, obviously, to make sure that this is clear and also that this is communicated. Now, everyone that you are working with, let me get out of this, hold on. Everyone that you're working with needs to sign a confidentiality agreement. So this is a real one that I redacted. Whenever you send out a budget, any information about the film, because obviously everything is basically top secret, you have these vendors, people, whoever you're dealing with, have to sign a confidentiality agreement and basically say, okay, we're not going to talk about this to anybody. Then the studios, if you look at that, this is the production company up here that engages the service of somebody, or just want you to read the script, for instance. One thing to be aware of is that the big studios usually have production companies in all different countries. So if you are shooting, say, in Canada, but you do your post-production in California, then there's probably a different country that you have to make those kind of confidentiality agreements for, or a different company, actually, that you make them for, than for all your post-production. So that's all something that you have to figure out with the studio in the beginning. Who are they using? What is that and why? The next thing that you need to get as soon as you hire a vendor, actually, and that's mostly the case with the larger vendors, is a certificate of insurance. Here's one from Canada. Obviously, the studio wants some securities, and that is, vendors have gone bankrupt before, vendors have made grave errors and stuff. So this way, at least, they know, okay, they have something there in the background where they can recoup their money if something really goes wrong. So it's just one part of all the contracts, actually, that you have to do. So if you, a lot of times on these shows, you work pretty much all the time, but you work with multiple vendors. But what can happen a lot is that you have one major vendor, which is usually one of the big visual effects companies if you have a large scale movie, because there's not that many companies that can actually handle a whole movie. It needs an enormous amount of manpower, of course, and of rendering power as well. But you will still, use several smaller vendors for smaller tasks, be it wire removals or beautification or whatever, or even certain things that if that vendor, even if it's a large vendor, they might be very busy with multiple other projects, that you find out after a while, you think, because our project got delayed, everything is kind of, the timelines are squeezing more and more, then it's actually even fair to that vendor to basically say, look, how can we work together? How can I take like a little portion from here or there and give this to somebody else to kind of lighten your load? Nobody wants to do that, but a lot of times it's actually necessary. So this bidding process, where you now send out your breakdown to the vendors and you basically asked for how much would it cost for you to do that, that is an ongoing process. And it literally starts in pre-production, as I mentioned, and it goes all the way, sometimes literally until days before the film is going to the theaters, because there's still something else that's being done. On several, just for example, Independence Resurgence had a little bit over 1,600 visual effects shots. I actually came a little later to that project, but just even in that time, I started during post-production. I had 8,000 different shot bits, somebody from multiple vendors, and sometimes from multiple vendors, and sometimes they are actual multiple bids inside each shot bit. So that's a huge amount, and that's a huge amount of data that you have to keep track of. So again, you need to build a very, very robust system to be able to hold all that. And at any time, you know, the studio might come and ask you and say, okay, so where do we stand? What's going on? How? And you have to be able to project what's still to come, and also to see what has been spent already and what has been allocated but not officially spent. Now, if you're lucky, you also have a visual effects accountant who is working with you on all those, you know, the actuals, let's say, of the bids, which how much money has been spent, how much will still have to be spent, and so on. But I didn't always have that, and sometimes you just deal with the overall accountant who isn't necessarily visual effects specific, and you really have to do it yourself. Now, when you get into pre-production and things become a little clearer, I just wanted to get back to that briefly. Still, we are dealing with storyboards. A lot of directors like that approach. I have a feeling that we'll probably do less and less of those, and we have actually been doing less and less of those in the past, let's say, 10 years, because a lot of times you go straight to pre-visualization, because storyboards are beautiful and they give you a great idea of what's happening in a shot, but a storyboard doesn't give you a good idea about timing. And you can look at those boards here, for instance, but you don't know, okay, how long is it scene really going to be? As you can see here, these first three boards, they say continued, continued. So it means these three boards are one single visual effect shot. Next one is a single visual effect shot. The next one after that is a single visual effect shot. So this is a tracking shot following our main actress as she comes out of the darkness in a tree stump and goes into our set. Here, right now with storyboards, you can only guess that. So I always like to get to previs as fast as possible. Another part of that pre-production is, of course, now getting into production design. You start getting, you know, production paintings like these, which now also give you a lot better idea of the details that need to go into the assets that you will be building. It shows you what kind of effects, in this case, you see there's a waterfall there, so you're dealing with fluid simulations, always something that's usually a fairly slow progress, and so on. So you get a lot better idea of what it actually is. So obviously, as soon as you have something like this, you want to make sure that your vendor, the visual effects house, has it as well. You'll be in a lot of these kind of meetings with the director, the DP, the first AD, the production designer, and so on. And hopefully what the production designer will have done, and they always have actually on my movies, and it's really, really nice, is that they've already designated in their little set mock-ups, like this one here, what will not be in the set. So obviously everything that you see here is green will be extended by us. Now, usually I notice you have to be careful because production designers and pretty much everybody else that's not visual effects like to make everything green, no matter what it is, even if it doesn't make any sense to put a green screen there. So you take them with a grain of salt, you look at that and say, okay, well, we may not need a green screen here and there, but otherwise it's always, I think, very, very helpful to be able to see this. Here's another example of a set that we know. This gives us a good idea of, okay, depending on certain camera angles, we know this will have to be replaced. This is also great for pre-visualization. When you build your previous models, you could, for instance, build in the lines where your actual model, your actual set build stops. So in previs, you know, okay, well, if I have a low angle and a 12mm lens, all of the stuff up there doesn't exist. I do have to do it in visual effects. So then you can gather from there, if there's a big dialogue scene in there and the director tells you, yeah, I would really like to see it from below and whatever, okay. 5 seconds, a page, is 60 shots. So you got 12 shots per page times 5 and so on. So all of this is very, very helpful. These are also different kinds of production paintings that usually get supplied by the art department for very specific set pieces, where they know, okay, we can only afford to have a very small set build, actually not quite that small in this case, it's probably 60 feet long, but all the rest have to be replaced. So again, very, very helpful for breakdown for the vendors to budget this and bid this and so on. Here, another thing, character studies. So this is mainly for character sizing, but also gives you a lot of the details of the characters. So this in combination with the information that you gave them about the level of detail that your characters need to be. Now, again, you can find out how much this will cost. How much? I see you guys are back on. How much time do I have left? 5? Oh, I can't hear you though. Sorry.
I'm sorry. We're a bit over the time, but I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to break up your lecture like this. So would it be possible that you just finish it up? And
yes, I'll just go through a few slides just really fast and wrap it up. Okay, good. So here we are.
Thank you.
A part of it, of the shooting prep process that the visual effects producer has to do is go to the camera houses. This is Panavision in the UK. Actually be there for the testing of the cameras. This is at Sony Pictures. You are hiring the LiDAR scanning people, and you're responsible for scheduling those to make sure they're on the set at the right time to actually LiDAR scan all the sets and all the locations that you have. You are responsible to schedule the cyber scanning. So all the actors that need to be scanned, props and so on, you need to make sure it gets scheduled. Motion capture, you need to make sure that is happening. Let me race through this fast. So I haven't even been at the shoot yet. I'm so sorry, I was way too slow. You need to make sure that you are constantly aware of what the shooting schedule is. This is a so-called one-line schedule. So here you can see this changes all the time, so you have to be constantly up and check what it is. I like to do little workflows like this that show what our visual effects workflows actually look like, how we work together with editorial, with previs, and so on. Let me skip that. This is a call sheet. You need to make sure that the people, the first AD or the AD department really knows who's going to be on set where. What I like to do is this. It's a quick one here. Actually, visual effects says, as per Marc Weigert. So that's kind of dodging this whole thing, because it basically says, well, just call me if you need to know. But they need to know how many people will be on set. So that's here. I'm going to read through it. Here, you start working with editorial. This is very, very important, because now you get quick times from editorial that you send out to the vendors, which will be the actual bids for actual shots. We're finally there. And this is going to be happening over and over again. And you need to track how many quick times have been sent out to which vendors, why, when, and so on. You have to create a turnover schedule. When do the vendors actually get their stuff? That you have to do with the director and editorial together. And here, just quickly, and then I'll stop. This is a wall. So we used to do everything analog like this. So this is all the entire storyboards of Independence Day Resurgence on one wall. And then I started actually building my own little system. This is from the last project, where I actually took 4 55-inch monitors, put them in portrait mode, and ran shotgun through it. So this is constantly live. So basically I have a live update, and it's in our office, so everybody can see this all the time going in and out of what the status of each shot is. I make the ones that are finished in green, the ones that are overdue in red, and so on and so on. This is very, very helpful, and I actually love this system. Here's another view of that. You can change, obviously, the views of that in whatever's important to you at this point in time. Here, another view of that. Just quickly, editorial still works in reels. That comes from the old 35mm projection. A current movie with about 120 minutes length has about 6 to 7 reels, a reel being about 20 minutes or less. And you actually group your shots and your sequences in the script into reels. You can see it here. I marked that. One last thing, you're also responsible, and you usually will fly to that, to audience previews. So one of the things you're dealing with in post, which always screw up your schedule, are marketing needs, PR, any of the things that they might need, because they will want to make sure that they have enough to advertise that. You will have trailers. So you need to make sure that you have visual effect shots finished for the trailer. And just so you know, usually in 90% of the cases, visual effects shots are not finished for the trailer, and whatever you see in the trailer is hardly ever a finished visual effect shot. A lot of times you can actually see that. A lot of times you can't, but there's always some other work to be done. And this is audience preview. So audience previews change things a lot. And that means, you know, that means they might change the script, they might change the edit, and it means you have a lot of other visual effect shots. And this is the end. This is basically what you see as you get closer to the end. Like this is a great example. We have 37 days left, and we still have 872 shots to finish. This is a real life example. And pretty much every project is like this. On the very last day, you might still have 100. You're responsible for the credits as well. As you know, credits look like this, sometimes 4 to 5 rows next to each other. As a visual effects producer, you look through it, make sure that everybody is in it who needs to be in. And you're responsible for the wrap. Here's a list of wrap items, just quickly. The studio wants to return everything that they've paid for. So anything from phones to copiers to whatever. And it wants all the assets and anything that got generated by the vendors to be delivered to the studio. So you're responsible for that as well. And that's pretty much it. So I hope this wasn't a little bit too fast at the end.
Yeah, Marc, thank you very much. And I'm really sorry I didn't want to hurry you.
That's fine.
As we're a bit over the time now, we would skip the Q&A section, but we could meet each other in Gathertown, our digital festival space, and then we can continue talking about VFX and stuff.
Yes, okay. Very good. Yes, I will do that. I'll get in there and I'll see you then.
Cool. Then see you, and thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.